Okay, let's get started. So, first of all, before we continue, is there anyone here who doesn't speak German? Okay, so we stick to English. My name is Sven, and this is Yannick, and we are going to talk about the limits of Shopware plugin development, and beyond that, so how you can overcome those limits. And for the first part, I'm going to pass over to Yannick.
Okay, so you may know Pickware, the ERP system, but it's not just like the core ERP suite with the mobile and point of sale plugins, but we also have lots of more plugins. So we have 23 plugins in total. In addition to this, we have 3 native iOS apps which we maintain. And also on top of that, we have some internal libraries we use as dependencies in the plugins. But these also have like dependencies between each other. So this is a lot of code. It's 370,000 lines of code in total. 200,000 of which is PHP, and then there's about 100,000 of JavaScript and 70k lines of code in Objective-C. So in order to cope with maintaining all that code, we had to develop some methods and techniques, and this is basically what this talk is about. All right, so.
Yeah, so as I said on the first slide, we found there are some limitations when you develop for Shopware. And we want to highlight a few of those. And the first one, and probably the biggest one for us, was there's no easy way to have shared dependencies between plugins. We all know Composer, I hope. Does everyone know what Composer is? Yeah? So if you install several dependencies using Composer, it resolves the version requirements for you. But in the scenario of Shopware plugins, where you install each plugin separately using, if you go just through the community store, you don't have that. You can't use Composer to resolve the version conflicts you might have between plugin versions. So you need to find different ways to ship different versions of your libraries in different versions of your plugins. So they will all still work, even if you have a very new release of one plugin from this week in the same shop as a release of a different plugin, which is maybe 1 year old. The second limitation is that loading Ext JS modules might be very slow. And we reached that point, I think it was roughly a year ago, where when you opened the Shopware backend, it would stall for a whole minute. So you couldn't do anything because it would block several threads in your browser by loading many modules, because we used Ext JS require in the app.js files a lot, so it would use many requests to load all the required modules. So it might be very inefficient depending on the size of your plugin. The third limitation is that if you want to write automated tests for your plugins, it's really complicated to do that. And by complicated, I mean is that, of course, you need the Shopware environment to run your code, to have not really unit tests, but we call it integration tests. If you work with the Shopware data, you always need the Shopware core, you have a booted kernel, and you will end up with state in your database. So you have to make sure that it's easy, when you want to write a test, to create the state you need, and also to get rid of it if you don't need it anymore. And the fourth limitation is that it's really, really complex, or let's say complex, but it takes a lot of work to release a new plugin version. And you probably all know how it feels if you have a plugin that's compatible to Shopware 4 and 5.0, 5.1, 5.2, and you have to tick all those boxes when you upload a new zip file. So that's what we call complex. And also to build the plugin zip file itself, especially if you have dependencies you have to resolve and so on. So to explain how we overcame some of those limitations, And for now, I just want to focus on the first two. Let's look at the simple scenario here. So you have a shop, and you've developed two plugins, and for now it's really simple plugins. Both add a button to the backend order view, and if you press one button, it marks the order as completely delivered, and if you press the other one, it marks it as completely paid. So two plugins, they use the default Smarty view extensions and just basic Shopware plugins. So as I said, if you have a very complex setup, really big plugins, if you use shared dependencies between plugins, you would want to improve the performance by not using separate requests to load all these modules once they're needed, but to resolve the view dependencies on your server side. So that's why we built what we call the Vision JS loader. It's called Vision because the company behind Pickware is named Vision. And what it does is it monitors the incoming requests, and once the infamous load requests hit the server, we check all the registered sub-application extensions. And for example, if you load the order module, we would find all the extensions in our plugins that extend the order module and also find their dependencies, resolve the dependency graph, and add all the code you need to the response of that one request. So the backend stays always responsive. And yeah, as I already said, you might have components like buttons, or not only buttons, but models, complex views you want to share across plugins. And so that's why we had to build a way to create shared dependencies that are not only limited to PHP, but again, it also contains Ext JS code that is loaded by the JS loader when needed. So in the steps I just explained, I want to show you now in the scenario I described. So we prepared a little, yeah. Okay, so I think that should work. So first of all, I want to show you just, as I said, what the plugin does. We installed that delivered plugin, and you can see here, it adds this button. Sorry, my backend is in German, but you should get the idea. Mark as completely delivered. So if I click it, I didn't bother to have a live update here. If I click, you see it changes to completely delivered. So is that big enough? The text, is that fine? Can you read it? Yeah. Okay. So as I said, it's a really simple plugin. We have a few subscribers here, and that one view we would like to extend. So we use Smarty's block append, override that detailed overview, and add a button here. So very simple. But now we want to use the JS loader, and all it needs to do that is to remove this Smarty block, because we don't have to rely on Smarty anymore to load our components. So we save this, and just so that you can see that it actually still works, I just changed the title here. And so this was the original subscriber that would also check for the load request and then manually extend the Smarty plugin with our view component. We don't need this anymore, but instead I add a new subscriber here. We call it sub-application registration. And so I renamed this one. And we have our JS loader also has a also contains an abstract subscriber we can use here, which provides a very easy interface for us to use. So check that. So the subscribers. And if you're wondering, this is already code that is part of a shared dependency we're using here. So we have a lot of abstractions to make it really easy to create new plugins. So remove all of this. And now we have just one method we have to fill here. And this is the name of our sub-application. It also corresponds to the name of the folder in our views directory. And so I just name that application here I want to make available, and then I say it defines the order application. So the last step that's missing here, I think, is to change this. So we load this subscriber instead. Let's clear the cache. Oh. Yeah. Still. Sorry. Clear.
The perils of live coding.
I also disabled the cache, so that's. But in this case, you actually need it because Smarty will cache the extension, and then you end up with errors because you load the same code twice. So let's load the orders here again. Choose a different one here. And as you can see, the button is still there. It has the test, so it's actually the change code. And yeah, that was it. So it's really easy to migrate existing components you have to use our JS loader. And again, it's a really, really simple example here. But for example, in our main Pickware ERP plugin, I think we have roughly 40 view extensions, and they also load each other as dependencies. So in that case, you really need that server-side loading. As the next step, I want now to use a button I prepared in my shared dependency. So I know I already have that dependency, so I want to add it to my plugin, and we use Composer for this. So we use Composer to install the dependency, but not to load it. And for that, we developed a extension for Composer that installs it, but doesn't add it to the autoloader. So we are able to load it ourselves when needed. It's called SCD the button. One. And we use the installer pass here to put it outside the vendor folder, so right in the root of a plugin. And now it's updating. Sorry. Okay, while Composer is busy, now it should finish the image. Yeah, so it's installed version 1 of our dependency, and now we have to make it available in the plugin. And we split our plugins in two methods that boot the plugin. As you know, maybe the first method that is called in your plugin bootstrap is after init. And so we just trigger two methods. First, we load our dependencies, and then we load the plugin. And as I said, we already have one shared dependency here, but I just add another one. That's the order button. And also, we need to load the plugin subscribers and so on. We decided not to put that in the dependency loader itself, but just that the dependency loader find the latest version of our dependency. So it will search all the plugins that are installed for the same dependency and loads the namespace of the latest version that is available. And yeah, so down here we register the subscribers of that dependency. So it should be available already. And so now we want to use that button here, right? First, let's find that button. We only have a single button here. And it's called the unicorn button because it adds unicorns to our button title. So this is again just the name of the component. And if we want to use that now, we change the syntax here. Keep this one, and now we can define our dependencies. In this case, it's just a component we need, and it will be loaded alongside this component once the load request for order is triggered. So the last step we need is to change the button in our application. Yeah. Yeah, I don't need this thing anymore. We can remove the styling here because it's also part of our button. Let's create cache. Okay. Reload. That looks funny. Okay, so here it is. It has a unicorn. So we use our custom button already. And again, the only code you really have to add to your plugin to load dependency is this line, or if you don't already use the dependency loader, also this line. And most of the dependencies you'd have probably need some subscribers that are registered. So maybe 2 more lines of code, but that's it. And then you can use all this. And so now to show you that what I meant by we have to make sure that the latest version of the dependency is loaded, I have a second plugin as described in the scenario before. So now we have only one plugin. Let me add that second plugin. So I just symlink it and install it. Clear the cache maybe once more. And this plugin contains a newer version of the dependency. So you should see that it not only adds its own button, but both buttons will change because they use the same component, but in a different version now. Oops. Yeah, so the button now has these robots here. And so that all happens in the background. And we use that a lot. So if we find a bug, I mean, you all know, sometimes you find a bug, and we fix it. We only have to release one plugin in some cases. We only have to release one plugin because we know that some customers will have that plugin if they have another plugin that uses one of these components, and it's fixed across all the backend where we use it. I think a common approach in the community is to have a separate plugin people have to install first. They call it base components plugin or something. So before you can install the plugin you want to install, you have to go back to the store and add another one. And you might have to update that one and so on. But we don't need this here. We just develop, tag our versions, update composer log files in our plugins, and the next release, the latest version of our libraries are shipped. Yeah, so that's how you speed up your development for backend and also the backend itself. And for the second part, I hand over to Yannick again.
Thank you.
Semicolon. Thank you.
Why did it go up there?
One question, where was the versioning of your plugins? You did it in the composer, but also in the code?
Yeah, so we that dependency loader is also a shared library we installed using Composer in that case, because we decided its interface cannot change. It must not change, because then you might break your plugins, right? So it has only that single method. And it will search for the directories that you define by name and checks whether they have a version PHP file. And then it includes it, and the version PHP has a return, and then it's versioned.
Okay.
All right. So Sven has shown what happens up until the commit. And then there's like what we strive to do at Pickware is continuous plugin delivery. Continuous delivery is a buzzword you maybe have heard already. Who has heard of it? Oh, quite a lot already. So the idea basically is to make releases boring. So usually a release is something that's kind of exciting, or maybe you're not looking forward to it too much because you ship a lot of changes. There's a lot of risk associated with that. And then it's also, often it's a very involved process. So what we try to do instead is to release often, and by this reduce risk for the individual releases. And also, there's like a special case with Shopware plugins because you can't downgrade plugins. Once you've shipped a new version to the customer, they are stuck with that version. They can't go back to the previous version because you may have already changed the schema. So a rollback is not possible, and in this case we want to be able to do a roll forward real quick. So we want to ship our fixed plugin if we had a bug. We want to ship our fixed plugin very quickly and get that to the customer as fast as possible so they get the fix. So, and of course, if you're trying to deliver features, going fast is good in general. Okay, so there's an example, very simplified continuous delivery pipeline. So first there's commit, then there's some kind of testing phase in which automated unit tests, integration tests, maybe even acceptance and UI tests are run. Then once this test is passed, you usually go ahead, take your release, and somehow package everything up into a plugin zip, which you can release through the community store or upload directly into a Shopware installation. And now comes the best part. We have packaged our plugin up, we can finally release it. So some people do continuous delivery like that. Maybe you heard of how Netflix does it. They just put everything onto production and hope everything works. Usually you have a kind of a manual intervention step at this phase, where you say, okay, I still have to approve of the release. Okay, so testing of plugins. There's some issues with writing automated Shopware plugin tests. We've identified and we've written our own testing framework to help us write tests more easily. So one basic issue is that you have to have a lot of data prepared in order to actually write meaningful tests. So you probably want to have a backend user, customer, article, and then an order. Then you can actually run the part of your plugin functionality or your controller, and then afterwards assert that everything worked correctly. So that's quite a lot of work, and as you maybe know, developers tend to be lazy sometimes, so people write less tests, which is not desirable. So our solution for that is we have factories, which have methods you can call, which just prepare all the data you need, and then you can focus on writing tests that assert that the actual functionality is correct. But then you get the next problem, which is that once you've written all these orders to the database, they might still be there when the next test runs, because, and this can be a problem, for example, when you have analytics modules, where you assert that a certain number of orders has been passed to make sure that the result is correct. So this may make the tests interdependent and make them behave non-deterministically, which is also not very desirable. So what we do instead is we fully clear the environment, like we clear the database, clear the cache, and everything before each test, which is by default before each test class, but you can also clear it before each individual test method. Then there's another very specific case, which was problematic for us because we have plugins that depend on each other. For example, when we want to write tests for Pickware Mobile, we have to be sure that Pickware ERP is installed first. So we have our testing framework install those plugins and then run the tests. But the problem is when you install a plugin, the first thing you do is usually instantiate the model manager. Then the model manager will instantiate the attributes or will load these classes for the attributes. And then your installation method runs. And this may create additional fields in your attributes. But because your attribute classes were already loaded, when you now execute your plugin test, the attribute fields aren't there. So this was a problem for us, and in order to resolve this, we have a technique by which we install the plugins and generate attributes and clear the cache on a separate process, and only then execute our tests. Okay. So packaging step. Maybe let's do some audience interaction here.
Has Shopware seen the problems or heard from the community and trying to do something better than now?
Now they have, I guess. I mean, I don't know if you attended the second talk in this room today, but it was also about how to write pull requests in some parts.
Okay.
And they said it's good, or it's the best pull request if you provide tests. But if you've written tests for Shopware, you know that there is some state in the database, and it's always there. So there's sometimes even SQL statements to add new data. And then you might run into the case where it's hard to write your own test. You want, if it's really deep in the core, to write your own test because some other tests might fail due to changed data. So I guess Shopware is aware of the problem.
Yeah. But let's also open the conversation with this, right? All right. So let's have some audience interaction. How many manual steps does it take you to build a release zip? Like maybe we can have a show of hands who need 6 or more steps. Manual steps. Still counting? 1. Okay, 2 to 5 steps. Okay. And who can do a plugin, package a plugin release in a single step? It's not a lot. So, yeah, of course, we have a script that packages our plugins for us, which basically works like this. It just downloads the latest tag from the GitHub repository, runs Composer install on that, removes some extra files we don't need, then builds a plugin directory structure like the namespace, like backend or core, and then the technical plugin name, and puts that into a zip file. So that's this stage for us.
So that's 5 steps.
Yes, but I only have to run one command, which is the point.
Or not run it at all.
Yeah, or you can just run it on a CI environment, which we also do. Okay, so nice. We've packaged up our plugin. Now comes the fun part, the best part, finally release it. So let's start the release. So this actually speeded up 5 times. We're getting faster internet next week at the office. This is my favorite part. Yeah. So this took like 2 minutes, which can, like, if you release lots of plugins very often, it can get annoying after some time. So it got so annoying for Sven, he built a tool for that, which is written in JavaScript, uses the undeck documented Shopware Store API to take the binary, upload that, sets the Shopware version compatibility for you, so all those clicks. It also parses a changelog file in the plugin, and then it can even optionally request the plugin review. Okay, so going to show you all of this. First of all, testing. I'm going to show you what the plugin does again. So I push this button, and then the order status should change to completely delivered. This is done by you see that? So I want to assert that the controller that handles this works correctly. So let me show you the test case for that, or maybe the controller first. So this is the controller, which gets action, which gets an order ID passed in. Then just does its magic, and at the end of it, it updates the status. So we want to write a test for this, which I've already prepared here. This uses our custom test framework. Just we have a base class for controller tests. And then in the first step of the test method, this is just a normal PHP unit test, like Shopware uses also. The first step, obviously, is that we need an order, which you can change the order status on. So for this, we have our test factory method. In this case, since we really don't care what type of order it is, we can just call this function, which does a lot of stuff. So it creates a backend user, creates an article, creates an order detail referencing that article, picks a dispatch method, picks any payment method, and then creates an order with all of this information. So this is a very simple case, but if you want to test a very specific feature, so you, for example, you would need an order attribute to be set or an order detail attribute to be set, you can just pass in an array which only sets that one thing, and this will create your test data accordingly. So it's really simple to get everything set up so you can start testing. The next step, you can just dispatch the put request. In this case, since we don't want to actually test that Apache or Nginx is working correctly, what we do instead is to dispatch the request through Shopware's kernel directly on the same process without ever going over the network. So we get a response back, parse that, and then in the first step, we just assert, okay, we got a successful result, which is fine. And then in the next step, of course, we also want to make sure that our order status was updated as we intended. Okay, so to run this.
A question, shouldn't
Yeah.
there be some housekeeping to the data you test
Housekeeping as in?
remove the test data at the end of the test?
So that's actually the magic we put in, which is that this controller test case will, after it has been run, clean the environment completely. So it will basically reset all Shopware tables to the state they were in before you ran the test. So they are not interdependent. Okay, so the only thing left is this PHP unit XML file. There's some environment settings and test group specifications, so you can choose which tests to run. But this is like the magic line you need in order to get all these benefits I just mentioned. It's a bootstrap file for testing framework, which will clean up the environment, prepare everything, install the plugin, and then boot up Shopware for you, so you can run your tests. Okay, so I'll show you this. So I just have a normal Shopware installation, which I've configured for testing installed. And then I just run the PHP unit, which was shipped with Shopware, or installed by Composer for me, and pass the PHP unit file I just showed you to that. Okay, so this takes a few seconds because in the background this will actually install the plugin for you. So it takes like 10 or 20 seconds. When you're developing locally, you can disable this and install the plugin beforehand yourself and then rerun the test all the time. So this is so you get a faster feedback loop while developing. But of course, we also run this right now on Jenkins, but we're switching over to Travis now. So then you want to install the plugins on every run to make sure you always get the same environment and you also catch installation errors this way. Okay, so our test was green. Everything worked fine. So yeah, I can show you what I just mentioned. We have, in this example, I also put a Travis file into the GitHub repository. which basically does just similar things to what I've just done locally, but it will also first install a shopware, start a MySQL server using Docker containers, and then it will actually run the PHP unit tests. Okay, so now we've verified that our plugin is correct. Next step is to release it. Of course, for a plugin release, you should always have a changelog file. So we have this format for changelog files, which we put into our directly into our plugin repository. It's just a markdown file, has a version number, and the changelog entries in German and English. Okay, so I forgot the packaging step. Okay, let me show you this first. So I can call our packaging script with the name of the GitHub repository our plugin lives in, and this will just check out the latest tag, then run composer install, and then we have some extra stuff like add some extra information for Eincube, and also it will minify JavaScript by running it through minifyJS.
And maybe one note on that uglifying. You might know that uglify.js removes comments. And so if you have that smarty blocks in your comments, it won't work anymore. So we also built an extension for that, which wraps the comment in JavaScript code and then gets minified. And then it converts that JavaScript code back to the comment it was before. So you keep your smarty tags if you need them. Of course, we only have a few tags because, as I showed earlier, we just removed all the block appends and so on. But sometimes, for example, snippets are in strings, but other blocks or environment variables are just in comments, so they keep they stay in the code even after uglifying.
Yep. So this just created the plugin zip for me. I can show you this. That's very small. But you can see it created the backend folder and then the technical name of the plugin inside that. And also contains all of our dependencies, like a vendor folder, but also the shared dependencies were just installed into that package. Okay. So time to release that. So I can call SCS commander now with the upload command, but of course I'm passing the no release flag because this is just a testing plugin and we don't want Shopware to review it actually. And then I add the file name. It already finds the changelog in the plugin zip, and it will also read the plugin JSON file for metadata, so it can parse out the version and the compatibility for the plugin. Yeah, so my LTE connection seems to be somewhat slow. All right, yeah, so it completed. It reminds me to do the plugin release, which I'm not going to do. I can show you now. We have the plugin in our store account. Expired. And as you can see here, my version was uploaded, and it has also set my version compatibility and added the changelog I specified in my markdown file. Okay, so what's next? SCS Commander is already available on GitHub and also on NPM, so you can just install it and play around with it. Be sure to use the no release flag though. Yeah, so the other stuff is not open source yet, but if you are really interested in this or think maybe you could use this in your own projects or to improve your own development experience, let us know, drop us an email. Yeah, if you like found all of this cool and maybe at some point in the future are looking for a job, just write us an email too. Thank you.